What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Hey, John, what was the old saying about idle hands lead to...
Yeah, what is that now? Let me think about that. Idle hands...
Because if your hands are idle and they're not doing anything,
right.
So that means you're unoccupied, right?
Right, you're not doing anything.
So... Did I just say that, or did you just say that?
You said that, but I'm trying
to.
But
then you said it again.
But what was it? What was that saying?
I don't know. But there was a saying about idle hands leading to something that sounds rather nefarious. Well, it appears that we've got a lot of working age guys out there, John, who are literally on the sidelines these days, and they're caught in a squeeze. There are too few jobs, or just a real mismatch in terms of the jobs available and the skills that a lot of our guys have.
Right. No, I get that.
And it's really sad because we're talking about guys between 18 and 54, and that's the period when all kinds of things happen in your life, or, frankly, I would imagine don't happen. In other words, if you don't get it together between 18 and 54.
Prime working years, really.
Absolutely.
Right.
So, John, have you ever noticed that young women, I think, in our society today seem to be on a much better path than a lot of the guys?
I agree with you there. There's a big problem. There's a big push because this is a woman's world. And we've kind of left the guys in the dust, I think.
But what happened to that James Brown tune? It's a man's world, but it'd be nothing. Well, whatever. But I got to tell you, though, a lot of this goes back, if you think, to 2008, 2009, 2010. Those were crushing days from an economic standpoint.
Absolutely, for everybody.
And really, we haven't totally recovered from that.
No.
I mean, maybe there's some kind of euphoria going on Wall Street, but on Main Street, there's still a lot of confusion. So right now, we've got over 7 million of these guys, 18 to 54, and they are, well, drifting. Let's put it that way. And you look at it, and it makes sense because a lot of the industries that were affected during that period that we were just talking about, housing, manufacturing, other forms of construction, and those were guy-dominated professions.
Absolutely. Yep.
So those jobs, many of them, unfortunately, are not coming back. And I know the president does really believe that he's going to bring a lot of these American jobs back, and he's trying to, get the money from offshore. I understand that. But a lot of those jobs that we used to have, they may come back in terms of manufacturing overall, but a lot of those jobs are gone.
Technology is taken over.
Exactly.
And more technology is taken over. It's kind of scary because, in the coming years, we may see truck drivers out of work because of
why?
Driverless trucks.
Driverless trucks? I saw one the other day. Oh, no, I think the guy was just sleeping or something. No, but, people do say that's going to be the next wave of jobs that are going to be eviscerated. And when you think about those driving jobs, in many states, the leading job for men in the state is driving.
Right. So it's kind of scary.
No, really that is too. Well, there really is exponential change that's going on. And we're better to turn to understand more about exponential change than America Trends podcast. John, that's what we're here to talk about. We're looking at all kinds of trends and changes in our society. And, when I think about these men, 18 to 54, and the problem they're having getting back into the workforce, I think about it in really human terms because you and I think we could agree. I didn't know you when you were 18. But we were always working. I looked at my Social Security receipts, and they reminded me because I had to sign up for Medicare. Believe it or not, John, I'm going on Medicare. And they told me, well, you've worked since you were 16.
Yeah, that's when I started working at 16.
I'm really tired. when I heard that. My goodness, that's a long time. So,
it is.
But it defined us. Even our first jobs began to define the soft skills we needed, a few of the hard skills. Well, I don't know. I don't know about flipping hamburgers at McDonald's, what that really led to. Maybe it did lead to radio.
Well, it was independence, though, really. I mean, you think about it, when you were 16, you had your own cash, you got a car.
Yeah, there you go. Well, seriously, so now a lot of these guys, they don't have their own cash.
Right.
They don't have their own car. They don't have their own home. They're not going to get married because these women that we talked about, the young women who are doing rather well these days in professions like healthcare, and they're getting into technology. We see where many more women are becoming doctors and engineers.
Absolutely.
And so these are really good trends for the women, but a lot of bad trends for the men. So if they're not getting married, if they're not buying their first home, that's all a prerequisite. You have to have a job in order to do those things. So that means those idle hands. We're going to figure out what that statement is, that phrase.
The next show, we'll figure
The next show, okay. Well, you can't get a loan to buy that car that you talked about driving around and cruising in.
Absolutely.
You need a J-O-B, perhaps the most important three-letter word in our vocabulary.
Right now, yes, it is.
So why don't we do this? Let's explore the topic with Robert Doar, now with the American Enterprise Institute, formerly in the Bloomberg administration in New York. And he's the co-author of a report called Getting Men Back to Work, Solutions from the Left and the Right. So there are guys on the left and guys on the right, and they've come together with a whole lot of ideas. And we want to see what we can do about this trend.
Well,
and
let's
that's what
fix
we're doing
this
today.
problem
Let's
right
do
here.
it right
Let's
now.
do it.
That's our job. With us is Robert Doar, a fellow in poverty studies at the American Enterprise Institute, along with two colleagues at the American Enterprise Institute, Harry Holzer and Brent Orrell. They have put together a compendium of thought as it relates to what do we do about getting men back to work, solutions from the right and the left. And Robert, how difficult was it to get your arms around this since you all came at it from a different philosophical bent?
Well, it wasn't that hard because we all three agreed it was a very serious problem that required, a willingness to try everything. It's definitely a crisis, as my other colleague at AEI, Nick Eberstedt, has shown. It's a real problem. The labor force participation of prime age men has dropped precipitously and is at kind of all-time lows, and that's not good for our economy. It's not good for them. It's not good for their families. And so the three of us all felt that it was a problem of such significance that it required us all to be willing to try solutions that we might not ordinarily agree to in other circumstances.
So you might agree more or less with some of the conclusions, and someone from another perspective might agree more or less with various of it, but you did decide that in total, all of these things should be considered or tried.
Yes, it amounts to about 7 million men who are not disabled, they're not seniors, they're not kids, and they're not working, and they're not even looking for work. And it's a real problem for their communities and for their families and for themselves, but it's also a problem for our economy. So that led us to be willing to, for instance, in my case, I was willing to be more open to trying once again to make really effective training and education programs work for out-of-work people, because those programs have been hard to be successful at and have sometimes not gone so well. While on the other hand, my colleague Harry Holzer was willing to accept a more tougher attitude in programs like food stamps and Medicaid about people who come and say they want those benefits but they're not working. Well, those programs should say to them, how can we help you get a job? And right now, those programs are saying, let's just sign you up and see you in a year. And in my opinion, that's not really helping people, because the reason they need Medicaid or food stamps is because they don't have earnings, or they're not employed. And we ought to look at both getting people to help, but also finding ways to help them get into the labor force.
When we look at this issue, and you're talking about men, does that mean that women are doing better in our society? Is it that the professions that they're going into are more open or haven't been devastated perhaps in the way that many male-oriented industries were hit during the Great Recession?
Yes, there is an element of that men have been more severely impacted by changes in the labor market. And so there's an element of that. There also is a fact that our social services programs that do push people into employment are often directed at women because they are more likely to have children in the household. So a mother, for instance, who applies for cash welfare will get a strong effort to help her get a job. If she needs a subsidy like the Earned Income Tax Credit to make work pay, as they say, because children in the household, the benefit of that program is much more generous. While a single individual without children in the household, or a man who doesn't have kids residing with them, the benefits are much smaller, and their attachment to programs that might push them into work are much more limited. I don't know that they're doing in general better in society, but our ability to help people move into the labor market when they're outside of it has been, in the past 20 years, directed more at women and not at men.
Did you look at any models outside of the United States? Many people talk about the way the Germans have tried to integrate apprenticeships into their industrial development, and you do suggest that we need training programs in community colleges and more apprenticeships. Did you look outside the United States for other winning formulas?
Yes, you're right about Germany and other parts of Europe that are much better at apprenticeships, and we like apprenticeships, and we hope that in the next 4 years there's a big increase in the number of apprenticeships and the number of efforts to get people certificates and pay while being trained in important jobs that are actually in need of more highly trained workers right now. So yes, we look there. We also looked at the United Kingdom, where they have done some things with regard to disability reform, in which they've been willing to understand and recognize that while someone may have a disability, that doesn't necessarily mean they can't work, and that we ought to find ways to help them work despite their disability, and we ought to find ways to be sure that people who apply for a disability because of a disabling condition are periodically reviewed to see what is the current status of that disabling condition. Is it still preventing them from work? So yes, we are open to ideas from around the world, but mostly Western Europe, and those are two examples.
Is there a skills mismatch? A lot of guys who came out of high school or perhaps a 2-year college, and they're just not equipped for the types of jobs that may come back if, in fact, we're successful in bringing manufacturing back to the United States. Are you worried that as many training programs as we might establish, that the pace of change within the world of work may outdistance us?
There's already a skills mismatch. We are in need of people in the trades, in plumbing and electrician. In some parts of the country, there are issues concerning truck drivers. So yes, we are concerned about the training not matching up to the demands of employers, and we would like to see improvement on that score. And I think as we go forward and the economy continues to change, our programs to retrain people need to be more flexible and more fluid and more responsive to the demands as they occur. So yes, we are concerned about that. It does come up, and it also is there also is some concern, and I'm not so sure that we covered this in the paper, but it's definitely in the literature, that not every American necessarily needs a 4-year college degree to get a good job, or really wants, or necessarily is that's where the direction they want to go in. And yet we've tended as a country to push people in that direction to get a 4-year college degree that then turns out not to be as useful as a really effective certificate in a particular skill, where good-paying jobs do exist, and they're going wanting.
We're talking about a report called Getting Men Back to Work, Solutions from the Right and the Left. Robert Doar, one of the co-authors of this report, is with us here on America Trends Podcast. And I noticed that you're putting a lot of your hopes on a big federal infrastructure program. Explain that.
Well, there is a feeling in Washington, this is a little bit influenced by Potomac fever, I have to acknowledge, that the new president and the Congress may come together on infrastructure and do some additional spending there. And there is a need in the country for beneficial improvements to our airports and roads and bridges. There has been a lot of deferred maintenance in the country, and we could do more and better in that area. And that may be an opportunity to help some of these men who are outside of the labor force come back into it. And we definitely attached ourselves to the position that if that does happen and the significant investments are to take place, we hope that in some component of it there's a requirement that the recipients of the funding have to reach out and bring into the new jobs or the jobs that are created people that are outside of the labor force and are in need of a particular kind of training in order to get into the labor force. And so, yeah, we are hopeful that an appropriately funded, an affordable infrastructure project that comes out of Congress will help. It's certainly not going to be the whole enchilada, but will help some of these men who are not working.
You were mentioning in your report about a project in Baltimore that did this, that ensured that there was going to be some support as part of the project for those who are chronically unemployed as part of a local community benefits agreement. Is that the type of thing you'd like to see on a federal level?
Well, we mention it, and we say it's a model of the sort of thing we'd like to happen. From my standpoint, the more that sort of thing is run and mandated and administered from Washington, the less likely it's going to be successful. I think the answer to your question is that's the sort of thing we'd like to see happen at the local level. And if there's some way the infrastructure funding can incentivize that or encourage that to be administered at the local level, that would be good. That is one of the things where that kind of program you're describing, something that is one of those examples of where someone on the right like me who's a little more skeptical of that kind of thing felt, well, the problem is so serious and it's so problematic for our country. I'm willing to try. It's not going to cost us a lot of money compared to what really drives our deficit and debt problem. So I'm willing to give it a shot and see how it works. But generally when you're mandating, in my judgment, when you're mandating that kind of thing, the more local involvement and local participation in how it's done and the way it's done and how flexible it is way better than a one-size-fits-all solution from Washington.
Robert, I'm curious as to how difficult it was to get your sign-in for another idea that came out of this report, the expansion of the earned income tax credit, while also fixing the significant error rate that you talk about. I know that there are many programs, or at least ideas around the world today, about ensuring a basic income. I don't know how round your conversations were about all of these things at a time of great dislocation, but tell us why, at least in this report, you got at this earned income tax credit, and explain it to us.
Sure. So the earned income tax credit is our second or first biggest program to help poor Americans get into employment. It is a refundable tax credit, and the way it works is people who are eligible file a tax return showing that their income is pretty low from work, and then the earned income tax credit sort of tops up their wage with a one-time credit or payment from the IRS that for households with children in it, for instance, a single parent with 2 or 3 kids can get up to $5,000 to make a $8 an hour wage job go a little farther. And it has been shown to reward work and to help people stay in the labor force. And some people feel it actually brings people in the labor force. But childless individuals, people who don't have kids in the household, like the men that we're talking about often, are not eligible for anywhere near that kind of support. And so a similarly situated poor person with a high school education or less, if they have kids in the household, they're offered this very generous wage subsidy. If they don't have kids in the household, they're offered pretty much nothing. And because the one that does exist and is generous has been successful in increasing labor force participation, we think, and many people think, both Republicans and Democrats, that an increase in it for childless adults should occur. My problem is that the existing EITC has a very bad payment error rate,
and
up to
explain
20%.
That.
Well, the IRS is not a social services welfare program, and so what they don't really want to verify eligibility. They don't really know how to be sure that someone's tax return was properly filled out and describes a situation that makes them eligible for this very generous credit. So it's sort of based on trust. You file a return, you say you're eligible for $4,000. And the IRS, under very tight time frames, because the rest of us who get credits against taxes paid demand that we get our refunds quickly, the IRS treats the recipients of this benefit the same way, and so the dollars go out very quickly, and as a result, it's prone to waste and fraud and abuse. Sometimes it's not anybody's fault. Sometimes it's an error that people don't mean. But the fact of the matter is year after year, audits of this program have shown 20% of $60 billion or $70 billion doesn't go where it's supposed to go. We can't expand that program and add a new group of recipients to it until we fix that problem. And so that was my view on that. Is that while I'm open to an earned income tax credit increase, and I've said this many times, I can't go along with it unless we address a really glaring problem in the existing program. And I think most people would agree. If you're going to open up something to make it better, you ought to really fix it before you go forward. I would add one other proviso that's in there, is that because we're talking about men and we're talking about a targeted group, mm-hmm. The idea of expanding the EITC to all childless adults makes me a little nervous too, because then you could get some people that, children of upper middle class families who are taking a year off after graduating from college and work only a little. I don't know that are really the ones I want to provide a refundable tax credit, which is basically just a sort of a benefit just sent out the door by the federal government. That's not who I really want to help. So we suggested in the paper that maybe we could direct it at non-custodial parents, that is, absent parents in the household who are paying child support but are also working in low wage or have low earnings, and we want to help them. They're complying with their societal expectation that they support their children, and we would want to supplement their wages. We did that in New York State under Governor Pataki. It's a fairly small program, but it does send the right messages. If you play by the rules, if you're doing the right thing, if you're supporting your children, and you're not making very much, we want to subsidize that wage and reward you for doing all the right things. That is the sort of thing that I would be comfortable with, and that's where the paper kind of ended up at.
Robert Doar, you also looked at those who are very hard to employ, or those who are living in depressed communities where few jobs exist. And we know that those are communities that I think in large part look to Donald Trump for some dramatic changes. And you said we need to create jobs there, but we may need to do it through subsidies to employers. Now, again, when people hear the American Enterprise Institute, perhaps they don't think that the soft hand of the government is going to be as involved as this report may suggest is needed, given the intractable nature of this problem, or at least the growing sense that we can't have 7 million idle individuals, men between 18 and 54 in our society, and to be successful.
Yes, this one was easier for me than the other issues that we've talked about. I think that employers are our best friends in this, and I want to help them hire more people and pay people more if they can, and to the extent to which government can help that happen with subsidies or supports, I'd like to do it. I even go a little further in which where I would be supportive of government-created jobs that do important activities like clean parks or provide help to the sanitation department. We did that in New York. We had both in the Parks Department and in the Sanitation Department. We had jobs programs that were helped to be created by the Social Services Agency with a goal of hiring people who came to us seeking assistance, and we could say, no, we want to help you, but here we've got this group of jobs that are exactly designed to help someone transition off of benefits and into work. It's temporary. but it is a job, and you need to be there, 9 to 5. And it turned out that not only helped us get people into work who were seeking assistance, those were also the kinds of jobs that the Parks Department and the Sanitation Department would not have been able to create if they didn't have that temporary component. If they were going to come with the full array of long-term security protections that go with public service jobs, they wouldn't do that. But here they could get important work done. The union went along with it on a temporary basis and for a particularly vulnerable population. And again, 7 million men not working and idle is not good for our communities, and I think we should be willing to try things that may take us out of our comfort zone from the American Enterprise Institute in order to get them into work.
Well, that was it in a capsule, Robert Doar, talking about the problem that we're trying to address today on America Trends Podcast. I thought it was interesting, and I want to give you folks a lot of credit because you looked at a whole range of things. For example, this whole concept of banning the box in terms of people's criminal backgrounds, you say that we need to reduce the many barriers that those with criminal records face, helping them to re-enter the labor market while encouraging employers to treat them fairly. How do we do that?
Well, you brought up ban the box. I don't think we reference ban the box because, in fact, Harry Holzer, although he's from the left, is someone who's very skeptical about banning the box. He thinks employers have a right and to know the backgrounds of people. I think what we're saying is if you're fully informed, you know the background, you know what's going on, we still want you to make that extra effort, and maybe a subsidy or an incentive will help make you do that. I happen to think, by the way, the thing that will do it the most is a strong, growing economy. I mean, the fact is we're already beginning to face, in many parts of the country, a labor shortage. There are places where people cannot find workers, and so the best way to do it is to have a situation where our economy is growing, our employers are feeling confident about the future, and they're willing to invest in their workers and take a chance on people who have been left behind in the past. I know employers all over the country in my work who have done that and have found that when they take a chance and add a little extra to the training and the nurturing of a new employee, that pays dividends for them and their company. And that requires a little bit of also, we mentioned this, breaking down this failure to stand up for the cultural expectation that able-bodied individuals who are adults and are in society should be in work. Work is good for them, it's good for their communities, and it's good for their families. And I think we need to be clear to our employers and to others that are leaders that we want to help people off the sidelines and into employment.
Absolutely. And you also talk about these diseases of despair and that we need greater efforts to treat and prevent opioid abuse. Tie that together for those who are listening.
Well, a paper that's gotten a lot of attention is out of Princeton University. Two economists, Ann Case and Angus Deaton. Angus Deaton is a Nobel laureate, and Ann Case is his wife, but is also a phenomenal economist, have shown that there is a portion of our population, and sometimes they're identified with the Trump voter, white, male. Things have not gone well for them. They've lost the access to good manufacturing jobs that have been in place in their communities for over a long period of time and provided a pension and security. There are other issues facing them that are troubling them, the pressure of foreign trade. And they are feeling as if the country isn't paying attention to them and is leaving them aside. And by the way, I think they're feeling that way partly because so much of what we do from Washington, and certainly in the previous administration, was directed at the very poor. You know, we put a lot of money in food stamps. We put a lot of money in public health insurance. We talk a lot about the people who are, get above the poverty line. Well, these people are not. They are above the poverty line. They come from families that have been outside of poverty, but they're falling backwards. And as a result, they're turning to behavior and to other kinds of things that are not healthy, including opioid addiction. So we gotta listen to those concerns, and we've got to respond to them. And sometimes that means we have to respond to them by by trying things that are that we might not normally try because the problem is so severe. These deaths of despair refer specifically to the fact that mortality rates among this population have gone backwards while everyone else's mortality rates has been improving. So in other words, they're dying at younger ages at greater rates, and that is a problem we cannot ignore.
How do we reform public benefit programs, and you name a number of them, such that while we're still allowing for a safety net, we're encouraging people to move on as quickly as they can, or there must be some component of work involved? How do we do that?
Okay, so I come from that world, and one way we do that is we say to the administrators of those programs, we want you to ask about employment and help someone and tell them that you're expecting them to move to employment. We ask the administrators of the program to keep track of the number of recipients on their program who aren't using these benefits as work supports to supplement their working at low wages, but are actually using them as work replacements and aren't working at all. We want to know how many and why. Why is it that so many people on Medicaid are able-bodied, adult, and are saying they have no earnings when there are job available in their community? Same as with SNAP. So the first thing is we send a message to them. The second is that we have the programs have the authority to say, I need you to be someplace tomorrow. I need you to take this job that we have found through our efforts with job developers and with employers. And if you decline that opportunity to either receive training and education or to get into a job that's offered, there will be a consequence with regard to your benefit. And that, I think, even people on the left agree that if someone declines an offered job, then the agency ought to have the right to say, well, then we're going to reduce your benefits. So that is actually how a work requirement works. It's a requirement both on the agency providing the assistance to pay attention to this issue and to have processes in place to reduce the number of non-workers on their caseload, and it's a requirement on the recipient to actually take advantage of opportunities that are presented to them. And if they don't, there can be consequences.
There's also some suggestion that we need to reform our federal disability programs. Are we suggesting that maybe there is a bit of a gaming of that system by guys 18 to 54 at this stage?
I think I don't know. I'm positive we don't use the word gaming, and I don't think we assert fraud, but we do acknowledge that the disability programs have grown in a way that seems out of or inconsistent with the health status of Americans. And more than that, anyone who's really worked in disability knows that people can work who have some forms of disability. They just need to be provided an opportunity to get into work. And right now that's not happening. So yes, there's an acknowledgement, absolutely, that those programs are not helping people by just signing them up and ignoring their opportunities for work.
In closing, when we look at the importance of work, John and I were talking about this as we assemble an introduction to all that we're talking about today. And I mean, if you don't have a job, you really can't start a family, you can't get loans, you can't build that house or help to renovate a house. I mean, all the things that really define you and your future are limited in terms of your scope at that point.
Yes, one thing you don't hear in the report, and you wouldn't hear in the report, is this attitude about dead-end jobs or bad jobs or jobs that aren't worth taking. We don't believe that. We believe work is essential to the dignity and prosperity of all Americans, and even work at low wages structures a life and brings them active into their communities and their society, and will always lead them out of poverty. And so it isn't just that work is good and right and proper for people and makes them better citizens and better fathers and better mothers, but it also is always better with regard to income. Earnings always increase income and bring people out of poverty. That doesn't necessarily get them safely into the middle class. I acknowledge that. But the idea that it's better to receive a benefit with regard to poverty status than to be actually in work is wrong. Work always pays more than welfare.
Getting Men Back to Work, Solutions from the Right and Left. Robert Doar, one of the co-authors of this report from the American Enterprise Institute, with us today on America Trends podcast. I thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
If you like this episode, please leave us a kind rating or review. I'm on my hands and knees. Please do it on iTunes, because your review is really critical for us to continue providing this podcast. And John, I know that iTunes looks at this. They want to make certain that we have some rankings, some visibility, and that we're getting some traffic, and then they give you better positioning.
Absolutely. And this way, it'll put us in the forefront so you can find us much easier on your iPhone or Android, whatever you may be using.
And they may even send you out an alert. So please, if you can, don't miss a single episode of America Trends podcast. And, John, they can subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher.com.
And also subscribe on our website.
Oh, absolutely.
We send out a little blurb, and we can also take your emails there at newsletter@rifkinradio.com. That's another way to get us.
And we do not sell or share
no
our list.
Spamming, nothing.
Well, I don't know. Does anybody want our list? I don't know, but we don't do it.
Good question.
Even if they asked us. Nobody's asked us. But.
Right.
And when you do subscribe, let us know on Facebook and Twitter. We're getting very active on Facebook and Twitter. Our handle on both platforms, and John, this is really easy, @Trends Podcast. That's it.
That's real easy.
You like that? Did you get that?
I got that.
Okay.
I'm going to have to check it out now. I'm going to have to twit it.
We want to thank you, of course, personally for subscribing. And we also would like to get some of your ideas and questions for future episodes of America Trends podcast. And that's important, too, because we're all over the map. Our interest editorially in the future, John, has no bounds. But we want to know what it is that you'd like to hear from us. If there was a segment that you'd like to see us follow up on, or if there's something in depth that you'd like us to deal with, please let us know that, too.
We're looking at the future. There's so much we can look at.
Yeah, and the topics that we've dealt with, I mean, we have gotten such incredible guests over the recent period, but they're only going to come to us if they know we've got an engaged and interactive audience.
Absolutely.
So it's really important that you become part of this podcast in so many different ways that we're sharing with you today.
You're absolutely right. We need your support and your help and your reviews.
And your ideas.
And ideas.
Or questions on Facebook and Twitter. And by the way, you can direct message us @Trends Podcast or using the hashtag Trends Podcast. You can also add an email address if you have a public one that you'd like us to give out.
Yeah, good. And you know what? We didn't mention Amazon.
Oh, yes. We have an Amazon store.
Yes.
And so if you go up, you don't have to buy the things that might be highlighted at that particular time. You can buy any book, and there's some benefit that comes back
Just
to
put
us.
what you're looking at in the little search engine block there, and it'll take you right to Amazon, and it'll help us out.
Absolutely. And it doesn't really cost you anything more because they have built that into their pricing structure. So we get a little taste and you get more programming like this and you get the item that you were looking for. So it works for all of us.
It's a win-win.
Absolutely. Win-win-win.
Win-win-win.
So for more information on America Trends and for the latest updates on upcoming episodes, be sure to like our page on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. You can find us at Trends Podcast. And again, you can find John and I here in our studio performing as best we can for you.
That's right.
And
Let us out.
What's that? They're not going to let us out. No one is. Hey, listen, thank you so much for joining us today on America Trends. We'll see you next time.
We hope to hear from you soon.
Oh, by the way, we are posting all the time. And we're posting on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Good point.
So just be aware, if you're looking for new episodes, they're coming on Tuesdays and Thursdays. When you wake up, before you go out on your jog or your walk and you want to take us with you, we'll be there for you.
Very good.
All right. Have a great day.